금융위기 이후 끊이지 않는 유럽발 재정위기, 미국 경제의 더블딥 가능성 등으로 세계 경제는 여전히 안개 속을 걷고 있는데요. 올해 이데일리 세계전략포럼에서는 새로운 주체로 떠오르고 있는 아시아 국가들이 미래 전략을 어떻게 세워야 할지 아시아 전문가로 활약하고 있는 푸른 눈의 유럽인을 만나보기로 했습니다. 바로 다보스 포럼 아시아 담당 이사를 역임한 바 있는 프랭크유르겐리히터 호라시스 컨설팅 회장입니다. 리히터 회장과 함께 중국과 일본 사이에 위치하면서 북한이라는 지정학적 변수를 안고 있는 한국이 급변하는 세계 정세 속에서 어떤 미래를 설계해야 할지도 알아보겠습니다.
Thank you for joining us today and attending Italy's second World Strategy Forum. We really appreciate it. Actually, we have lots of questions about the world and Asian economic outlook because there are still a lot of uncertainties out there after the financial crisis, But before taking up the main subject, let us have your life history briefly.
I'm very pleased to be with you today. I think it's a great success, the second World Strategy Forum. We got very interesting people from all around the world, talking about Asia, talking about Korea. It's a privilege to be here, and as you said, my own history, I was always very attached to China, to Korea, to Japan, to the rest of Asia. But it's always nice to come back to Korea. Korea has a very strategic positioning here in Northeast Asia. And what I said before in my session is that Korea might be a hub, might be a platform, might be a center for exchange and trade.
You spent 6 months on the Silk Road, and you called it as a survivor trip in another interview. And what made you decide to go Silk Road, and what did you learn from that survivor trip?
It was really a survival trip. It was even dangerous from time to time. I was robbed, I think, twice. I lost my money, and it was a very difficult time for me. With a while, actually, I had to learn how to communicate with people and maybe to ask people for help. What I still do today when I travel, I always talk to everybody, starting with a taxi driver, and he takes me from the airport to the city. And what I learned during this Silk Road trip was really that all knowledge in the world is good knowledge, and you always have to have an open mind and learn from everybody. What made me traveling to the Silk Road was that I lived in Asia and I had to go back to Europe, and I had some time. So I think the best way to spend it is to go on the Silk Road and to be and to see a bit the history of Marco Polo, the famous Italian adventurer who was traveling between China, Asia, and Europe in the Renaissance time. Of course, I'm not Marco Polo. Today, times have changed. We have different means of technology and of transportation. But still, when you go to the Silk Road, you experience maybe sometimes that a ride on a donkey, on a camel, can change your mind. And I very much enjoyed it. The only thing today, what I regret is that I have no more time to do the similar thing again. I would love to do it again and re-experience this trip on the Silk Road.
After the Silk Road trip, you settled down in Beijing and watched the Chinese economy grow by double digits. And Chinese economy is still maintaining relatively high growth, but there are some worries about the real estate and stock market bubble. Do you think that China is in the midst of bubble?
You know, we've been talking about the Chinese bubble for the last 20 years, and nothing happened until now, and there's a reason to believe that nothing will happen in the future. Why? China is not just a country, it's a whole continent. You have very rich cities and counties like the whole seashore, starting from Dalian in the north, going to Guangzhou in the south. But you have also the hinterland, and you have a very agricultural area, which is still to pick up the growth and the pace of economic growth. I think the growth in China is almost unlimited. It will go along. It won't grow at the pace of 10% in the future, maybe a little bit less, around 7 to 8%, but still enough to catch up towards the US as the most important economy in the world. Maybe in around 2020, so in around 9 years from now, I could see China already overtaking the US.
You said that we are entering the era of emerging economies after the financial crisis in our email interview. Which country will play a key role in the new era, and how long the new era will be last? Maybe you mentioned about this in your email, but please say it again for the people who are watching this program.
Right. You see that there's a shift of power from the west to the east and from the north to the south. It's not only Asia rising, but it's also Latin America. It's also Africa. Africa is a fascinating growth continent. From Cape Town to Cairo, we see a lot of economic activities. And we see other emerging markets like China and in India investing now in Africa. At the same time, we see the decline of the West. Europe and US is definitely in decline. We have a sovereign debt crisis in some southern European countries like Greece, Portugal, Spain, and so on. And I can hardly see how Europe can continue to manage growth and manage its unity. The euro might fall. At the same time, the US dollar is weakening. I think what we see in the US, it's not very good news. Unemployment is up. So definitely Asia and other BRIC countries are on the rise. If I would have to single out one country, it's definitely the C in the BRICS. It's China. China, and we talked about it before, is a new engine of globalization. And whenever a Chinese prime minister is traveling to Latin America or to Africa, he is celebrated like a pop star because he comes with investment, he comes with interesting activities in infrastructure in those countries. So we see more of a South-South investment. The West is being kept out, and we see the emerging markets now investing into each other's territories. We also see Russia as a very important BRIC. It's the European BRIC, so to say, but also Brazil in Latin America, and in India, the second biggest economic power here in Asia. So it's a new area, as I mentioned before. It's a new area of emerging countries, and we in the West have to redefine ourselves.
Nouriel Louvigny, professor of economics at New York University, said that G20 has become G0 without leadership at the World of Economic Forum this year. And Ian Bremmer, you know, he's also the panel of today's forum. He also predicts a G0 world, right? What do you think about that? Do you think that neither G20 nor G2 can lead the world?
Ian Bremmer is definitely right in saying there's a lack of global leadership. There's no longer one institution representing the world. The old so-called Bretton Woods institution, the World Bank and the IMF, were built actually after the Second World War and still reflect the realities of, let's say, 1948 and don't take into account the rise of emerging countries. So I think we have to reform those Bretton Woods institutions, and one first step would be actually to have an Asian or somebody from emerging countries leading an institution like the IMF or the World Bank. G0 is not necessarily something bad. I think we can live in a world without one or two countries governing us. The notion of G2, China and US, actually is not a very good recipe if you have only two countries governing the world. So a G2 actually is better because we have many actors, many countries playing an important role. What should be done, and this may be my interpretation of G0, is also to invite other stakeholders to take part in the discussion, not only countries, not only economic powers, but maybe some large companies. Take Facebook or take Google, or maybe like a GE or Siemens or a Volkswagen. I think those companies are so big, or take a Samsung here in South Korea, those companies are so big that maybe their turnover is bigger than the GDP of most countries. So that should also sit at the table and talk about the issues of importance to the economy in the terms of a new diplomacy, where we have no single country, no single region governing the world, but where we have a stakeholder approach of many different actors getting to the table and trying to solve the issues.
Now, let's talk about Korea.
Yes. Yeah.
Recently, the Bank of Korea raised interest rates for a third time this year to rein in inflation. Do you think it is an appropriate measure?
We see similar moves actually all around the world, even at the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, where we are reasoning about an interest rate hike, and I think it's the right thing to curb inflation. You know, inflationary pressure is here, and you have to counter it. Still, we have to be careful, of course, not to do too much. If it's too much, then we would maybe put the brakes on economic growth fantasy. So we have to find the middle way. But I'm quite confident, and we have excellent economists at the central bank here in Korea that will find the middle way and do this increase cautiously but steadily.
Okay. So you said that you wouldn't be too worried about Korean economic prospects in our email interview. Do you have any tips for Korean policymakers to strengthen the competitiveness of Korean economy?
I think you have very strong companies here in Korea, very export-oriented companies. What is still missing, I think, is inward investment. You need more investment coming from overseas. And I think investment is very benign if you have major companies investing here. And maybe you should also offer Korea as a place, as a platform to build regional headquarters of MNCs, of multinational companies. So that's maybe one of the most important recommendation I would give to the Korean government, to be more open to foreign direct investment, which could also create employment at the end of the day. And so you're not so much depending only on your own company's employment drives, but also on foreign direct investment.
You said about the competitiveness of the Korean companies. Are there any impressive Korean companies do you have? And if so, why is it so impressive?
You know, I don't want to single out one single company, and I think there are many impressive companies. What I see is also in Korea that you're always very fast in what you do. In some European American companies, we have very long-term plans. We calculate everything, and we leave nothing to the sheer coincidence. In Korea, you just do it. You are very fast, and it's maybe one of the key competences of Korean companies. Maybe just one example, if you take LG. LG had an important strategy actually in the mobile phone sector, and as you know, they failed a little bit in the area of smartphones. They've been latecomers. And now they changed the management and again on the right track. So this speed of adaptation and to know what is right and what has to be done, I think is one of the key strengths of Korean companies.
China changed its strategy from export-driven growth to the one driven by domestic demands. And what kind of impact of such a strategic change will be on Korea?
Indeed, we see the rise of domestic consumption. For example, during a weekend, a typical middle-class couple in Shanghai or Beijing, they would go shopping. And they're not shopping Chinese products, they shop for foreign products like luxury products, maybe Korean, French, American. And it's like the latest thing actually in China, this appetite for shopping of foreign brands. I think Korea can only benefit because you can, sell your products into the Chinese market. I think for clear, it should be luxury products. You can't go for cheap products. You have to go for the high-end products, like in technology, like what companies like Samsung, LG, and others are doing, but also into luxury, like handbags, clothing. So all those areas, actually, the Chinese consumers are hungry for.
You mentioned your major concern about Korea is geopolitics. And do you have any tips for Korean policymakers for managing North Korean risks?
I think you can't really manage North Korean risk. It would be nice if you could do so, but we always have to live with the unexpected. And, I'm German myself, and I observed a bit the German unification, and nobody expected it could happen, but it just happened one day. maybe the same thing will happen here in Korea. Maybe, maybe tomorrow or this evening there will be the first step into unification, and totally unexpected. I don't think there will be a war or major trouble in the years to come. I think both sides are very reasonable, especially the North now, to understand that a war would destroy the country and would destroy the economy. So I think both sides have to get together and find the right solution. The sooner the better. But the risks, of course, are there, and we have to observe those risks. But I'm optimistic on the long term.
Actually, you are the author of the Korea Conference, The Future, and you analyze the factors surrounding the possible unification of the Korean Peninsula in this book. How do you think unification might be achieved?
Well, the book was published, I think, 7 years ago,
Okay.
quite
Things
some time
really
ago.
changed, right?
And things changed, and of course, it's immediate change which will always be there, and I think it's happening more often. I think when I wrote this book a few years back, nobody would have thought of a global financial crisis, and what happened in 2007, and nobody thought about an Asian crisis 10 years before. So we have to live with the unexpected. Today, I think I'm even more optimistic about the role of Korea. Korea could be actually the linking point between China and Japan. Maybe Korea could also develop into a center of excellence for education, where both the Chinese and the Japanese go. So the future of Korea is bright. But you should not only look into your regional neighborhood, you should also look far away. You should look, of course, into the old powers of US and Europe, but you should look into Africa, what I mentioned before. I think Africa has vast opportunities, and I think the activities of Korean companies can be accelerated, can be improved, and I would wish to see more Korean investment into Africa as well.
Then what kind of field do you think the Korean companies can have a competitiveness in Africa?
I think in almost all industrial areas, but starting with infrastructure. There's a huge need for infrastructure, so construction companies to start with. Then, of course, in the whole area of energy, the energy so far was mostly left to the Chinese, large Chinese companies investing into oil, into gas. And then, of course, high-tech. Africa's high-tech infrastructure is far beyond or far below our standards. So I think here there are immense opportunities for Korean investors to discover and to rediscover Africa.
Okay. This will be the last question for today. It is about the Horasis Forum you hosted every year since 2005. And what are the main achievements of the forum so far, and what are you looking forward to over the next year?
I founded Horasis in 2005, as I said, originally focusing on China. We held the Global China Business Meeting every year since 2005, and the meeting now is, I would say, the major meeting for Chinese CEOs to meet on an annual basis with their global counterparts. It's a very practical meeting. We're not talking about politics, but we talk about cooperation, business, investment, HR, strategy, and so on. And it's really like a crash course for executives to learn from each other. It's a peer-to-peer approach. Over the years, we added more meetings. We are now doing also a meeting on India, on Russia, and on the Middle East. And in the future, we might add actually a meeting on Africa and on Latin America, covering the whole emerging world. The meetings are usually held outside the country, so never hold a China meeting in China or an India meeting in India, but we hold it somewhere else. And I would wish, and it's maybe something very concrete to be here in Korea these days, to maybe hold one of our meetings in Korea in the future. Maybe the China meeting or the India meeting, or we can create like a Northeast Asia meeting where Korea could be our host and our platform.
We hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you for your precious time today, and we look forward to seeing you again someday.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, and I would love to come back to Korea very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. I saw your question. I think you were one of the questions. So, regret. Do a little research about it. It's about the Silk Road, right?
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. I was a young man.